Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, September 5th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about a brand new poll released yesterday by YouGov and Yahoo News, polling the country on a potential matchup between Governor Gavin Newsom of the state of California and President Donald Trump, but also, and arguably more importantly, Vice President J.D. Vance in a hypothetical 2028 presidential election. Now, with a lot of conversation surrounding who might be the Democratic nominee in 2028, Gavin Newsom has largely dominated a lot of this political conversation as of late. And what we have found is that Gavin Newsom has now risen to being the likeliest Democrat to win the 2028 race roughly 3 years out. Now, of course, 3 years out is a lot of time. It's a lot of time for things to change as more candidates enter into the race or declare that they are running. Gavin Newsom himself has not even declared that he is running for president. So there are a lot of things that certainly can change. But what we are noticing outside of this primary, focus that a lot of people have is that in a general election, it is more likely than not on the Republican side that nomination process will easily go to J.D. Vance in the 2028 cycle, meaning that he will likely be the Republican nominee for president come that November. And thinking about where we are on the national stage, J.D. Vance as well, we have seen in previous elections where practically speaking, many of these primaries are largely formalities because of the insurmountable leads that some of these candidates have in the Republican primary. It is J.D. Vance that is getting 1 out of 2 Republican primary voters that with a wide list of candidates, Donald Trump Jr., Ron DeSantis, Marco Rubio, RFK Jr., Nikki Haley, Chris Christie, Vivek Ramaswamy, the list goes on and on. 1 out of 2 voters are siding with Vance 3 years out. And it's important to note, right, Vance, who very much seems like he wants to run for president, has yet to make that decision, right? This is not us going into campaign season. This is not January of 2027. This is September of 2025. But with Vance being this likely, follow-up to Donald Trump's nomination in 2024, a lot of what we have started to see in terms of assessing general election viability is taking the top polling Democrat and facing them up against J.D. Vance. And what we have found is not great for the vice president. And the reason why that is because the data we are seeing in this most recent Yahoo and YouGov survey is that not only are Democrats, doing well in the generic ballot, they lead here by about 4 points, which is enough to win them control of the House in 2026. But in a general election matchup against J.D. Vance, Gavin Newsom leads by quite a bit. What we have found in this survey is that the approval rating of Donald Trump is -15, a little bit more than what the national average is, but largely a discontent electorate. But even with such a discontent electorate, Democrats aren't winning and dominating in the generic ballot by 15 points like the approval rating might suggest. They are leading by 4 points, but 11% of this nation is still unsure. But when it comes down to a hypothetical matchup of Gavin Newsom versus Donald Trump the president, but also J.D. Vance, the lead is the same. Newsom leads by 8. The same electorate that is choosing Democrats in 2026 by 4 is saying that 2 years after, if it came between Gavin Newsom and J.D. Vance, I'm choosing Newsom by 8. And over Trump by 8 as well. And I think this is exactly, what Republicans should fear about going into the next cycle with J.D. Vance being, made king by Donald Trump in the Republican primary. It's the same thing that sort of happened, in years past, where it has been very clear who the president of the United States at the time wants to be the nominee by the next cycle. And looking at how well that might have turned out, right, for Democrats or Republicans in the past, not amazingly. If you think about it from this perspective, the big takeaway I'm getting isn't just that J.D. Vance is, showing vulnerabilities 3 years in advance that Democrats can weaponize and maneuver and use in 2028. It is also the fact that J.D. Vance is not performing better than Donald Trump. The problem is about this, 2028 situation for the Republican Party is that a lot of them have been counting on the fact that they will have an open primary and allow voters to express their concerns there. But it won't be open if Donald Trump makes an endorsement of J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio to be on a ticket together. which right now is what I would be betting on 3 years in advance. Regardless, though, the second part of the problem is that being unable to associate yourself with an unpopular president, as this data does in fact suggest, and the national average also suggests as well, makes it difficult for you to win the general election. Just ask Vice President Harris how well her association to Biden helped her in the general election, because arguably it didn't. And that's the problem here for JD Vance. You see, looking at, just this prop, even if it is Donald Trump again, the fact remains, you can't find a degree of separation in support between the two because they have become meshed together. The same exact thing that dragged down Vice President Harris in the 2024 election. Because a lot of the states that she lost, Biden was losing too. And a lot of the states where we saw that before the candidate switch happened, her approval rating in some states was actually lower than that of President Biden because the association was there, and by nature of it, voters decided that they liked her less, in the same way that voters don't like JD Vance more. Republicans, if they want to win in 2028 as it stands right now, and I know it sounds crazy because we are 3 years out, and I want to note, we are very far out. A lot will change between now and November of 2026 and November of 2028. But looking at where it stands, this is not a great place to be. In 2017, we can actually look at that data if we want. Maybe I'll pull it up just for the sake of making the point. But in 2017, the data was very strong for Joe Biden. I mean, that was clear. We talked about this because I was creating videos in 2017 covering polling in the general election. So let's take a look at what it looks like. In 2017, between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, you're going to find it was very rare to find a poll in 2017 that said that Donald Trump would defeat Joe Biden. Joe Biden was a vice president associated with a popular president. It was hard to separate thinking Obama-Biden because they had ran on a ticket together for 8 consecutive years. And so after Obama left office, it was all this, this thinking, who would be the person who could usher in this Obama-era style victory? The name that came to mind countlessly and always was none other than Vice President Joe Biden. And deliver an election victory, he did. The data early on was indicative of that. Joe Biden was outpacing every single other Democrat, which gave him that brand of being the most electable Democrat. A year after Trump was elected, Joe Biden was defeating him in the only November poll of 2017 by a massive 11 points, because he was associated with a popular president where that comparison and that association could not be separated. Now, it hinders the vice president again in the same way it did to Kamala Harris. Thinking about where we are in this data, what surprises me the most is that voters are somehow more willing to vote for a Democrat in 2028 up against Trump or Vance than they are for a Democrat in 2026. But in a way, it makes sense, because expressing your disapproval with a president does not withhold you to a political party. But looking at it against that same president, or what you might view and see as, that president redux being JD Vance, is where you would express that displeasure, is where you would find yourself saying, maybe I'd vote for the other guy. Because I don't think that Gavin Newsom wins by 8 points in 2028. I don't think anyone wins by 8 points. But it's not a great position this early out to be this far down, because it should be Vance who should be leading in the data. And guess what? Looking at some of the data points too, it wasn't always that bad for JD Vance. Up against Gavin Newsom, just, taking a look at the data that was released by Emerson College right back, in just days before this one actually was fielded, JD Vance is leading by 1. The ones back in July, he was leading by 3. The advantage is dwindling, and dwindling in a tremendous way. JD Vance, again, should be this guy who is able to do well in 2028, because he should be reaping the benefits of the administration, but distancing himself enough, but that isn't happening, right? And it's the same thing that happened to Kamala Harris. I think that the 4-year break between Obama, and Trump juxtaposed against each other to the American public is largely what helped Biden win in 2020. I don't think Biden would have won Georgia in 2016. I don't think he would have won Arizona in 2016. And whether or not he would have won in 2016 is an entirely different conversation. But he was more well-positioned for a 2020 cycle, arguably, in terms of margin and in terms of, overall support. Because of the fact that voters had been given this time to really compare the two and also look at it from that lens. Okay, I miss Obama. This is the way of getting him back. And I don't think that we're going to see in 2028 that this is going to be a focus on getting a Biden-era Democratic president back. But there will be that conversation about getting back different leadership. And J.D. Vance right now cannot offer that. And J.D. Vance historically has been an underperformer. I think that is also what is important to note. Donald Trump has the juice. Donald Trump has, the enthusiasm and the media capabilities and the persona to be president in a way that J.D. Vance does not. And as I said, historic underperformer. In 2020, Donald Trump won Ohio by 8.1%. Do you know how much he won by in 2016? Also 8.1%. But in 2022, when despite, the national environment of 2022 was Republican plus 3, what does it say here for 2020? Democrat plus 4.5. What is that? A 7.5% swing to the right. So reasonably speaking, you'd say, okay, Ohio's going to swing, by 7.5 points to the right. We're going to end up with a Republican landslide. Well, in the governor's election, that's what happened. Mike DeWine won by 25 points. But you know what happened in the Senate election when J.D. Vance was on the ticket? Republicans won, but just by 6.1%. The governor's race and the Secretary of State's race and every other race, Republicans won by double digits. I kid you not, every single race. Senate election, J.D. Vance wins by just 6.1. So the national environment swings to the right by 7.5. And yet somehow, J.D. Vance underperforms Trump by 2 points on the dot in a red state like Ohio that 2 years after this election would go to Donald Trump by double digits on the presidential level. And it is none other than Vice President J.D. Vance who underperforms. He doesn't have a great electoral track record. And I don't think he was the right choice for Trump. Obviously, they won, but I don't think they won because of J.D. Vance. I think Doug Burgum could have helped more. I think Nikki Haley could have won more. The odds with J.D. Vance on the ticket didn't change that much, but I don't think they helped Trump. And you have found today that the approval rating of Vance is lower than Trump's. That's a major problem. It should worry Republicans that the top two contenders for 2028 are losing to a Democratic governor of California, because that has been the stereotype of the Democratic Party. And thinking about, that's the narrative that Democrats have said and Republicans have said. There should not be, another coastal candidate for president of the United States. But if J.D. Vance is already at this point where early on out, his numbers don't look great, and it isn't even just, a 1 point difference within the margin of error. Most of these polls have an average margin of error of 3.5%. So it's not as if this is, within the bounds of being, okay, maybe they just oversampled, Democratic voters by 1%. And so the margin shifted by 1. No, this is an 8-point lead against Trump and Vance, and the margins are identical. 41% of this nation is saying, I would back Trump and I would back Vance. That is a problem. Because as these numbers coincide, what it essentially does is separates, any distance or removes the distance between the two. And that distance is what J.D. Vance needs to be elected. Because Donald Trump is governing like there is no tomorrow. But unfortunately for J.D. Vance, there will be a tomorrow. A tomorrow where maybe his entire presidential ambitions hinge on the way at which the president acts in the Oval Office. And if it is not reined in, just as we saw this in September of 2017, I would have told you, and I did make videos about it, saying Biden would be the nominee at this point. There's a video I put up, in July, putting out a video saying it's going to be Biden and Harris, July of 2017, because that's what it was looking like regardless, though. I never thought Biden would lose because the data early on indicated the public wanted something different. And I know it seems very naive, and I don't think the same now. I don't think J.D. Vance is doomed. I think it's a bad sign. It can be turned around, but heavy on the word can. Because it could have been turned around for Trump leading up to 2020. But it wasn't. And as we see it right now, these are the red flags that 3 years out mean something. They aren't, a done deal The 2028 election still has a long time to go. I don't want us to lose that plot. But I do want us to understand that at the end of the day, you don't want to be in this position this far out of the game, especially with nobody having announced a presidential campaign where voters will have more time to push back against a president and administration that, as of right now, does not hold the approval rating necessary or conducive to Republicans winning in 2026, and now, based on the data we're seeing, even in 2028. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2028 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.